welcome into the Kevin Mandeville Show, live here on YouTube every Tuesday and Thursday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. You can subscribe at kevinmandeville.com/newsletter or just click the subscribe button down below. I am happy to have another guest on today's program. Let us welcome in Sam Sexton, Email Marketing Associate at Moo. Sam, welcome into the program.
Hello, Kevin. Good to be here.
Yes, and I think you are the first guest coming from across the pond. So this is...
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
We're going worldwide on today's show.
I feel privileged.
So I'm really excited to get into a lot of, maybe more of the marketing end of things compared to some of my past guests. I've had a lot of design development stuff. So I'm excited to get into that and working with Moo, which is a really great brand. But I'd love to get your backstory. How did you get into this wild world of email design, development, and marketing?
Yeah, so I was actually I was probably your first actually guest that actually started out by sending Viagra emails, unfortunately. So there's a story to this, which is that I had a computing degree, so I went through college in the mid 2000s, and I was trying to get a job as a web developer or whatever. And then that got me into email because I was just like, what do I do? There was no jobs out there, so email seemed like something interesting. I had the HTML skills, so I got in there, started an email job, just sending out, like I said, Viagra emails for what was essentially a company that was marketing to doctors. So this isn't like consumer Viagra emails; these are professional B2B stuff. So yeah, and then from there I kind of just got the bug. I didn't have a whole lot of work to do, so I used to spend a lot of time just reading stuff. My favorite bit of reading to do was the Microsoft MSO documentation, which because we were using Outlook 2007, I was like looking at these people that were using Gmail, and I was like, wow, that must be so great to work with Gmail, but I had Outlook. But it was great because I found out some things that I didn't know, like two of my favorite Outlook tags, MSO pattern and MSO ants, which if you've never tried it, it actually makes little ants run around the letters, which is, and I'm still looking for a use case to use that.
That's pretty cool. So you spent some wild Friday nights. Your friends are going.
That's
you're
right.
Like, no, I got some major documentation to read here.
Yeah, I got to look at these ants.
So you really enjoyed it. You really enjoyed sort of learning the ins and outs and the quirks of all of that.
Yeah, I did. There was kind of nothing else to do, and then after a while, I just kind of really started to enjoy it. And from there, I think I was Campaign Monitor's Community Spotlight, and then that helped me, I think, get a job at Moo. Completely lucked out. It was my first ever job in London, so I went up to London. I live about an hour outside of London, so my first time going up to London for an interview was very, very scary. So I still count myself as very lucky to this day, but yeah, that's kind of where it all came from, and here I am, still at Moo.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so you've been at Moo for how long now? You've been there a while.
Yeah, 5.5 years now. I started in November 2013, so yeah, a long time. But in that time, I know pretty much all there is to know about what happens email-wise at Moo. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So what have you focused in on in your role at Moo, and how has it changed over the years?
Yeah. So when I joined, it was as an email developer, and so we were using eDialog at the time, which I think then turned into eBay Enterprise Marketing Systems or something. They've all got weird names now. But yeah, I was using eDialog, which in a completely undynamic fashion across multiple different languages. And so that was kind of challenging. But then over time, the marketing elements of my role grew. So I was doing reporting, planning, strategy, this type of thing, just trying to save, and also just trying to save myself some of the time that it takes to actually create some of these campaigns. I think the worst point was about 130 separate campaigns I had to make in QA in eDialog. So it can get up there, especially with languages, dynamic content, and testing. So yeah, so I've really been trying to just make my own life easier over the years.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean all of the ESPs, they all have crazy names now, right? All the digital engagement
Oh,
cloud
tell me about it.
plus
Um,
automation. So I
yeah, IBM's gone through three since we've been using them. So
yeah, yeah, and I love on your in Email Geek Slack, your display name is like Sam Sexton Engagement Cloud or something like that.
that's right. Yeah,
It's pretty funny. Yeah.
I'm
Uh,
just yeah, I'm just ready if someone wants to acquire me and change me into a marketing cloud. I'm ready. I can do that.
Open for business. Yep, I love
Yeah,
it. That's a great. You know what? I mean, hey, if you want to make money, it's like just make your own ESP or email client and sell it somehow nowadays, right?
yeah.
Um, so yeah, well, speaking of ESPs, then I mean, so how many have you used at Moo?
So, well, if you include the side ones, then probably three or four. So eDialogue, Responses, IBM or Watson Marketing Communication or whatever it's called now, and but also stuff like Campaign Monitor for sort of smaller scale sends as well. But then the sort of larger business side of the business focus, they use Pardot. So there's a wide range of different ESPs we use, but mainly IBM more recently.
Gotcha. And so, what's like your favorite and then least favorite? Would you say?
Oh wow. Okay, so least favorite eDialogue
Yeah.
definitely, but I will caveat that by saying I probably wasn't using it to its full potential. Best probably Responses. I think they have some really good stuff. I think they have some weaker stuff as well. Um, like for instance, one of the things that I didn't like about Responses is that if you want to see what what a person has received in the past, their email history, you can't do that in Responses. But IBM has much more robust framework in terms of data. So there's trade-offs to everyone, you know.
Yeah. And so, how do you manage? I mean, especially if you're using several in conjunction, how do you manage all of your subscribers and manage that data together? Do you
Yeah.
have a system? I'm sure that's a huge task. I know it's one that I've never been involved with personally, so I'm curious how a brand, especially as big as Moo, goes about it.
hmm Yeah, so that's a good question. It is a challenge, but luckily we have a great data warehouse team who hold the data warehouse, which is basically like a massive. It's basically where all the data lives, right? Okay, and so any data for any email system, if it comes from the data warehouse, that's the centralized place that it all exists. Um, yeah, but that is still challenging, you know, to make sure that everyone is aligned on certain flags, and are things sent at the same rate, and is it updated at the same time? These are the sorts of questions that we sort of have to ask when we're trying to manage this.
Yeah, and it's tough enough because email is just one medium, right? I know it's often a challenge because, I mean, maybe you are more in a product-based environment, but at least for me, coming from a SaaS-based sort of background, then you have the app notifications. So it's like, well, we need to make sure our app notifications and email notifications and whatnot, they're all aligned, but they're entirely separate data sources half the time. Yeah, it's a huge mess with sort of the technology now, with it being sort of debundled. You know, there is a downside to that, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So what does the email marketing team structure look like at Moo? How many people are involved in email, and how many different departments?
hmm So just on the production side of email, we have three roles currently. So myself, who focuses on life cycle, but then there's also someone that focuses on the business as usual campaigns, doing weekly sends. But then there's also someone focused on international specific campaigns. So that's the current way that the production side of it works. But then we work with, creative teams, product teams, brand team, content team. There's a lot of teams
Yeah.
involved in different emails in different capacities, um, and and then we have email manager that actually works in Boston. So So we have to sort of deal with that as well, sort of having about 4 hours of the day in which we overlap.
Yeah. And so, yeah, how large is Moo in general? Like, how big of a company is it?
Oh, well, I'm probably not qualified to answer this, but I would probably say we're between 200 and 400
Yep.
employees total.
Yep. And how many? And so I know you have a big one in Boston, but then you have London office, and what other locations are there?
Yeah, so we have a London office. We have, I want to make sure I get this right, 3 offices in the US, and we also have a printing facility in the UK and a printing facility in the US. So there's a lot of different places, but mostly in the US. But in terms of actual number of employees, it's probably about 50-50 right now, maybe more on the London side.
Interesting. Okay. And so what does your typical customer look like for Moo in terms of do you sort of have a specialty geographically where most of your customers are? In terms of your
Mhm.
subscribers, is it more desktop, mobile, more B2B versus B2C? Like what's your core buckets or categories look like
Yeah.
for your customers?
Well, I'll say this. It seems like people in the US are more fond of business cards. So I think the US is obviously our biggest market. Um, I don't know if that's a cultural difference, but that's certainly the way it seemed to pan out. Um, so yeah, most of it's in the US, but it varies geographically. But in terms of the actual type of customer, it's mostly small businesses, individuals and entrepreneurs, this sort of thing. So we serve everyone from someone that's just started a photography business, but then also on the other end of the scale, a massive company.
Gotcha. So I'd love to dive into the actual workflow for email from inception to deployment. And you talked about all those different teams that you have involved that you work with.
Mhm.
So how does it say a campaign, whether that's sort of maybe a weekly newsletter or maybe a special product announcement or anything like that? Like how does it go from the creative all the way through to deployment? What are the certain steps and teams involved that you work with?
So shall I just detail the
Yeah,
entire
just
process?
walk right through the workflow.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
fine.
Okay. So it all starts with the idea. That tends to either be based around a mix of either a mix of things that have gone well in the past, or things that we think will keep the audience engaged, like surprising content. We always try to mix in something surprising into our emails. Um, and then from there, it will go into a brief, which will go to the creative team, who will then work on that. And then we'll have a creative kickoff where we discuss how this is going to work. It tends to be, we've got quite simple templates. Simple is maybe not the right word, but we have templates that are quite, no, I'm just going to say simple. They're simple in the way they work. So it will be, hero modules. That's kind of the thing we need to discuss with the creative team, and then obviously it's copy, subject line, that sort of thing. So once the creative team have got an idea about what they want to do from their end, then they'll go into the studio, they'll do photography. So what some people might not know about Moo's emails is that actually most of them actually have a bespoke photography specifically for that email. And so that does take time, but for it we get unique pieces of art sometimes. So that's the way that works, and then they'll pass across the assets to us. We'll then go into Watson, and we will normally, and I'm sure this is the case for a lot of people, duplicate an old campaign, start changing things. All of our campaigns have a lot of dynamic content, so we serve 6 different languages, and all of those languages are wrapped up in dynamic content in every single email. So when you see a hero, when you see a module, you have to think of that as an entire dynamic content block that is split between 6 different languages. The benefit of that, going back to my 130 emails that I had to proof in eDialogue, the benefit of that is that we only need to kind of cut once, if you like. So there is one campaign with lots of dynamic content within it. And then if we need to start duplicating that campaign, it's normally for things like testing. But generally speaking, then we'll just sort of pick an audience from our standard audiences. We tend to have pools of people that we like to contact more frequently than others. And then we'll schedule a send. A big part I didn't mention is the proofing process and the translations process, which obviously take some of the time. The proofing process, for instance, involves a long list of people that go right up to the creative director who looks over things. Do all of those people actually look at the email? I don't know, but there is a long list.
Yeah.
But it works really well, and that's what we've been doing for years now, and the process hasn't really changed over the last couple of years.
So there's a whole lot to unpack here, so I'm excited to dive into this. So there's a lot of good stuff. So I'd say one thing that really jumped out, I think a lot of people, when they think of the Moo emails, that photography and that imagery is really what they think of, because that stands out. And you do, especially oftentimes, you use a lot of really striking animated GIFs, which is really cool. So that's interesting that you have a lot of bespoke photography for individual campaigns. So how far out in advance do you have to plan these campaigns? Like, what's that process look like?
So our creative process tends to take around 6 weeks. The reason for that is that our creative team actually work more like a creative agency. That's how we manage to maintain such a high standard of brand imagery. And so with that 6 weeks, then add a couple of weeks for briefs to be created and concepts to be come up with. So you're really looking at around a 2-month timescale. So what we tend to do is we'll plan far in advance. We'll plan the entire half of the year, and then obviously that is likely to change. Certain things come in, and you can never predict everything. But we always have a schedule in mind that we like to stick to.
Okay, interesting. So about half a year total for full lead time in terms of your perspective, knowing that it would take about 6 weeks for the implementation itself.
Yeah, we like to just cover all our bases with that half a year.
And so you had mentioned, obviously, you're using in-person meetings for some of these kickoffs and whatnot, but you mentioned a creative sort of brief. Like, what type of document does that look like? Is it a Google Doc, or what is it?
So we use Jira.
Okay.
Jira, brilliant if you're a developer. Can be challenging sometimes if you're producing creative briefs. But we've got it into a stage now where it works really well for us. So that will be information for the creative team, like what kind of assets are we looking at? What kind of products do we want to push? What kind of what else do we need to say? So it's a mix of specifications, just general, what do we want to achieve with this email, what our KPIs are, but also stuff like what products and what specific things we want to promote.
Yeah. And so are you using Jira as your sort of entire scheduler to sort of have a holistic view as well of all your planned campaigns, or are you using another type of calendaring tool to manage status and dates as well?
Okay, so this is a fun area to get into. So on the BAU side, we tend to use Basecamp, which works really well, and sometimes a little bit of Google Calendar as well, but mostly Basecamp for that. And then in terms of lifecycle stuff, and this is like really where an area which I really like to talk about, which is Airtable. So I use Airtable to manage life cycles, because life cycles is like this massive thing, right? It's so big, it's like a monolith, and you have a lot of with a medium to large size company, you have a lot of teams that are very interested in every facet of any lifecycle email. So what does creative team interested in what it looks like, product team interested in what products, other teams interested in what promo codes there are, this sort of thing. So how do you manage all that? My answer to that was with managing it like a database base. So I use Airtable, and that involves having several different. They're essentially like spreadsheets in Airtable. I think that's the best way to describe it. It's kind of like having multiple spreadsheets. They're all kind of linked together, but then there's a layer on top of that which is allowing you to put graphics, put your images, do calculations, lots of different things you can do with Airtable. But by managing it like a database, I can have a sheet for email series. I can have a sheet for specific emails. I can have a sheet for segmentation. I can have a sheet for specific modules. I can have a sheet for specific promo codes and things like that. And very importantly, a sheet that is dedicated to changes and a change log. So this is, I like to think it's the cutting edge of how someone would approach a large lifecycle program.
That's awesome. Yeah. So you're using Airtable. That's fascinating. And I would say that's definitely gaining a lot of momentum. And it's very, there's a lot of use cases you can have for Airtable. So I'm seeing people use Airtable in all sorts of different ways. So that's actually super interesting, really insightful. So there's still a lot more to unpack with your workflow. We're going to talk more about that in a second. But I just want everybody to know you can check out EmailTees, the proud sponsor of this program, at emailtees.com and on Twitter and Instagram at EmailTees. It's official apparel for email geeks, so you can look real fly like I am with my hat on right now. So everything from hats, t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, even if you want something to drink out of, give your campaigns an extra kick of caffeine, socks. I mean, have you covered head to toe. And it's a fun project that I'm doing. Would love everybody to support EmailTees. It helps supports this program, and I'm using it to fund other things. Like we're doing a local meetup in Boston later this month, which is where I'm at, but I'm hoping to expand that to other meetups all over the world, do other cool content initiatives. So check out EmailTees, get some email swag, and just let the whole world know you're a true email geek. So go to emailtees.com and eat your heart out, email geeks. All right, let's get back into your workflow, Sam.
Cool.
So I'd love to ask back to sort of the design aspect of the photography and the imagery and the design assets. What design software and tools are you using internally? So like what, if it goes from design to handoff to development, what is development getting?
Yeah. So would you like to know what development tools I use? Is that where we're going?
Well, first off, what design type of files are you getting? Are you getting Photoshop files or Sketch files, or what software is used on that end?
So we mainly use Sketch now.
Okay.
I'm happy with Photoshop. I'm happy with anything, but Sketch has been really helpful because it's really you can just take something in Sketch and export it as a HTML, which is really good if you're trying to develop an email or an email template from scratch. Then having that Sketch file and being able to look at specific padding and things like this is really, really useful.
Yeah, and so I guess this is a good larger question too. Are you using a design system of some kind with your entire email program?
Define design system.
Well, are you using? I mean, I guess there's things like in Sketch, there's symbols and things that could be more modularized and patternized. So I'm wondering, at least on the design side, do you have anything in place for that with your email program?
Usually it's just a case of taking it. If it's a BAU campaign, we'll tend to just look at the Sketch file. We'll extract the images sometimes, and then import those directly into the ESP.
Gotcha.
But there's a step that happens before these, which is the actual sort of creation of the template, which doesn't happen that often. But it's good to refresh a template every so often, and quite often over the years we'll concept new email creative, and that will involve taking the sketch file and then trying to recreate that in Litmus Builder normally, or a mix of Litmus Builder and Sublime Text as well.
Gotcha. All right, so you're a Sublime user and a Sublime fan?
I'm a Sublime user.
Yep.
Yeah. I also use I think it's standard Monokai theme.
Yep. Monokai theme.
Yeah. So
what do you like about Sublime? Why is it your editor of choice?
Oh wow, that I think it's just because I like Monokai so much.
Gotcha.
But before Litmus Builder existed, the only way to, I guess the first way that I learned to use Emmet was through Sublime Text. So I've just kind of stuck to it from there.
Gotcha. And you're using Litmus Builder to do a lot of the testing?
Yeah. So whenever we're coming up with a template and we're coding a template, then we'll do that I would do that in Litmus Builder, and then just prototype rapidly. So I like to move fast, so I'm just constantly writing, saving, testing, rinse and repeat, and just making sure that everything stays as I expect it as I'm building.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. And what kind of layout structure do your emails typically use for Moo? I mean, I know there's a whole bunch of options out there nowadays. People are going about them, and I know you've even talked about this at Litmus's conference previously. But yeah, what's your layout approach nowadays?
So, well, first of all, I'll say that our current Moo emails are, I think you'd probably call them a hybrid, fluid fixed width. I forget what these terms mean, but I think hybrid and fluid fixed width are the same thing. Yeah. You probably know more than I do on that. But I actually prefer, and some of the stuff I've been playing with recently is all mobile first. Certainly when I spoke at Litmus, it was a mobile first approach. That was difficult when I was talking about it at Litmus, because it involved doing the calc hack, which is kind of weird and obtuse, because you have to do this weird calculation that kind of means nothing to the actual size of the email. I don't know, it's crazy. But nowadays, you can do a mobile first template without really any caveats. And my big thing is, especially working in a company like Moo, a lot of our customers might be using Gmail with an IMAP account, because they own their own businesses, and they might have their own IMAP account. So that means I really wanted to get IMAP Gmail solved. The only way to do that is really if you're coding it mobile first. Tell me if there's another way, but I think that's probably the accepted way. So coding it mobile first, just coding the mobile version, and then laying on top of that a desktop media query, and then 2 more media queries for Outlook, and another one for OWA.
Yep. Yeah, that's the approach that I use myself, and I recommend, especially nowadays, and with Outlook.com getting media query support. I feel like there's really no excuse or reason not to do that. I mean, I haven't been doing table-based structure for years, so I don't know what that pain feels like. I mean, I have fallbacks for Outlook, but in terms of having to actually code your core layout patterns with tables, I haven't been doing it for years. So
now I want you to clarify here, Kevin, because you say you've never used tables, but are we counting ghost tables?
No. It's for non-ghost tables. So I use ghost tables as a fallback for Outlook, but I've been coding sort of div first with the mobile first approach for years now. and it just gives you so much more flexibility in terms of what you can do design wise. But
Yeah.
I'm also lucky too to where, especially having worked at Litmus, we didn't care about pixel perfection. So I could do something different for Outlook, and it didn't have to like match whatever we were doing for other clients. So I know I'm a bit lucky in that sense, but just the flexibility of it for progressive enhancement, I think the benefits far outweigh anything. And it's future forward, right? Now that Outlook.com is supporting media queries, just drop all that CSS for the Outlook stuff, right? So,
yeah. Is that confirmed, by the way?
So it's confirmed that it's happening. I see it in my test accounts that the updates now happen, but there hasn't been an official announcement, so I don't know that it's 100% rolled out at this moment. We should still wait. We should wait for the Litmus Microsoft announcement to be like, it's 100% done, because that's when you know it'll be completely safe. So I'm not removing that Outlook specific CSS quite yet, but it should.
So that's the Outlook stuff gone. Well, that's the OWA stuff gone. So then we just need to wait another 25 years to get rid of the Outlook 2007 and 2003. Sure. Actually, no, 2003 is not too bad.
Yeah, because that's IE. But I mean, even that, it's like once they update their rendering engine, right, then you can just remove those conditional comments and your layout hasn't been impacted for all the other clients. So
yeah,
especially now, I think with a lot of people, especially if you're on the B2C side, Outlook's decreasing so much. So it's like, why worry about a 10% user base for a lot of people? I know for B2B it can be a majority, but for a lot of people, they shouldn't have to worry about it too much.
Yeah, but there are those areas where you do think to yourself, you know, if you're offering a high quality product, then how many people that are using Outlook 2003, for instance, are really going to be interested in a high quality product? I don't want to, you know, I can't cast aspersions, but you know, it just seems like if you're using that old of a system, you're probably not going to be interested in spending, I don't know, however much.
Yeah. So do you handle the deployment of emails itself, or do you have another team or other people that handle that?
Yeah, so I do. Yeah, mainly now I focus on ad hoc stuff and just life cycles. Obviously, with a life cycle, the deployment is very different. It tends to involve creating an audience that you think are the best audience for that life cycle. So, for instance, if you're doing a win back email, then that might be people that haven't ordered in a long time, and then sort of putting that into a program, which, you know, I'm sure everyone knows what a program is, but it tends to look like a flow, a flow chart or something like that. So yeah, we'll build that flow and then publish the program, and then kind of just keep watching it and hoping it does well. That's kind of the way that works. But in terms of like the ad hoc stuff, yeah, I will take that. If it's something like a survey, for instance, I'll take that and you know, and build that and then send that. That's probably not that interesting, the actual send of a survey, but yeah, that's something else I do.
And so you had mentioned you have a pretty intensive approval process. How do you facilitate that? Like, what software tools do you use to get all of these approvals, collect it, and sort of have those final reviews approved?
Yeah, so when the copy is written, it normally comes as a Google Doc, and normally that will invite comments from all of the stakeholders. So that's step one in sort of approval processes. Everyone has their say about what the copy is. And then once we've actually built the email out, and I should say that when we're actually building the email, it does involve going through each and every dynamic content block, replacing the images, and then like replacing the copy for every single dynamic content block. So that can take some time. But then once that's done, then we'll proof out to a large list of people, of various stakeholders, and then kind of just wait for replies on that. The where we run into challenges is normally around stuff like where, because we're dealing with multiple different languages, you sometimes have issues around, if something comes back and changes the English copy, then you have to decide what to do about the translated versions, because the translations, because we use an external company for most of our translations, so that tends to extend the timescale of the email. So sometimes, depending on how that happens, we might decide to postpone, the French version or whatever it is.
Ah, interesting. And so how do those approvals come in? Is it over email? Is it Basecamp threads? Is it using Jira? Like, how does that happen from multiple stakeholders?
Yeah, so that's all handled over email. It is a bit strange these days because we mostly communicate over Slack, but then some things it just seems more appropriate to send them over email, which is good, right? Because that it pays the bills. We need people looking at emails. We can't have everyone moving over to Slack.
Yeah, and so. How do you handle amendments then? Are they coming in with feedback the exact same way through that email process, or do you have other tools that you manage sort of changes?
Yeah, amendments will come through email, but they tend to be mostly, if it's something like a copy change, then that's fairly easy. We'll just go back into the platform and make that change. Again, because we've reduced the amount of duplication involved in the email process, we only need to normally change things in one place. And as a general rule, if we're duplicating the campaign for testing or anything like that, we will wait until we've got full approval, and then we'll start duplicating the campaign for the test versions. That doesn't always work, but that tends to work. That's the best way for it to work, I think.
Gotcha. And do you typically have like a ton of amendments or changes that frequently come in for typical emails, or is it rather minimal? Like, what's that environment kind of like for your workflow?
Well, I think we're quite laid back as a team generally, so we kind of try not to apply too much pressure to the creative team. Also, just the creative team are brilliant at being able to know what we want. So normally, what we delivered with in the first place, it tends to be very good, and then it will just be small tweaks, and also something we sometimes run into is different things that don't work in the US, or things that don't work in a different country. So sometimes, because we like a pun, sometimes it will be something like, I think once we had fancy, I can't remember what the specific line was, but it was something like fancy this. Now that works for in UK, because that means like, how about this? But in the US, fancy is mainly used to mean like a fancy person, right?
Yeah.
So there are stuff like cultural differences that come up, or just like, and a lot of those cultural differences don't work in Europe. So that normally that means we'll have to sort of pivot and change. But normally we tend to get the creative team to write too much rather than not enough. So there's normally at least a few different subject lines that we can pick between. So there's always something we can do if something isn't right.
Cool. So I definitely want to talk about analytics a bit with you, because I think this may be an interesting area to talk about. So what are some of the key metrics, KPIs that you focus in on for the email program at Moo?
Yeah, so it tends to be most of the normal stuff. I'm quite big on making sure that people don't confuse click-to-open rate and click-through rate, which, if you've ever been in a different company, sometimes you see these statistics that come out and someone says, oh, we improved our click-through rate from 10% to 20%, and you think, are you sure you don't mean click-to-open rate? Because that's a really high click-through rate. So yeah, we'll tend to look at that stuff like that. But then some of the other stuff that I think is more unconventional is stuff like revenue. Obviously, everyone looks at revenue if you're a revenue making company, but we look at revenue divided by 1,000. So that's 1,000 people sent to, and that's good because that directly relates into your CPM, your cost per thousand for your ESP. So you can actually directly relate how much you're paying for your ESP to how much money you're actually making from your email program. But I love analytics, and I think you can get very, very deep into stuff like cohorts. I think are really good, also a really good thing for email, because if you start looking back over like monthly cohorts, you sometimes when you've changed, say you've had a brand refresh or something like that, sometimes that change will only show in newer cohorts, but the older cohorts will be will stop. Maybe the older cohorts will stop clicking because they don't like the new brand, but those newer cohorts are really engaged. So there's a lot you can do with stuff like cohorts.
Yeah. And so what software are you using to look at your analytics and to segment them and get a view of things like cohorts and click to open and things like that?
So remember when I mentioned the data warehouse team?
Yep.
So they thankfully, because there is a centralized data warehouse, it means that we can have we have Tableau, and the data warehouse team have worked very hard over a number of years to create these wonderful reports which show everything you could possibly want about email. But that's been a challenge over the years, because when we were responses, for instance, reporting responses is now I realize that it was actually kind of okay, but at the time that we were using it, it was kind of underwhelming, right? Because we want to see really robust reporting that goes right down, like all the way through the funnel, and like incredibly detailed. And that's the sort of thing that you just can't get from an ESP. So having a data warehouse and having Tableau with these reports is really, really crucial to what we do. And especially like looking at stuff like sign up rates over time, drop off. There's lots of different things that we use Tableau for.
Gotcha. And so Tableau, for those who don't know, that's like a third-party analytics service that you can aggregate analytics from a variety of sources. So it's really like a custom dashboard for you in a sense, right?
Yeah, the data warehouse team build data sources from the data that they have, and then those will be sort of refreshed on a daily basis so that we can see, have a very deep understanding of what's going on. But then, we also use Google Analytics as well, as I'm sure lots of people do. But then there's like more stuff that is kind of secondary to Tableau and Google Analytics, like called attribution models and stuff like that. So attribution modeling is where you're essentially applying a weight to different channels. So email has a certain weight to it, and display marketing will have a certain weight to it, and so you can see the difference. Because and this is another important thing about when we're looking at email performance, is that the numbers that we see, the click-through rate and the amount of people that came from the order and came from the email and made an order, that's only really part of the story. That will tell you how many people came directly from that email. That won't tell you how many people saw the email and then went to the site. That won't tell you how many people saw in the subject line that you were having a sale and then went straight to the site. And so normally, I think this is probably the same for a lot of companies. When you send an email, you actually see a big bump in organic people just coming to the site and making orders. So being able to tie that together and say, these are everyone we sent the email to. This is how much we made from these people that didn't open the email but still came to the site like within minutes of seeing the email.
Right.
So it can get really complicated with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. Marketing is #hard.
Yeah, it is, and it's only getting harder.
Yeah. And so okay, so if you have custom dashboards, I'm sure those are easy to share internally, but how do you present on maybe aggregate performance with other stakeholders in the company? I'm sure you do like reviews of, okay, here's a deep dive in our analytics performance. How do you share that with the rest of your team? Do you use Basecamp just to do a detailed thread? Do you make presentations? I'm just curious how you sort of share around the performance of certain campaigns.
Yeah, so again, that is #hard. The best way we do that is in just by doing weekly reports within our team, and then those reports will be distributed to the people that need to know about it, the stakeholders. But we try to limit the amount of people. We don't just send reports around to everyone. We try to make sure we're sending it only to the people that really need to know. That's just because normally with a lot of this stuff, they tend to raise a lot of questions and it makes sense to kind of we only really look at like a certain amount of things, like I've said, like click-through rate, open rate, and all the standard stuff, but also like revenue and orders and that sort of stuff. Normally, if we're going deeper than that, it would tend to be because we're looking at a specific problem that we're trying to solve.
Okay. So it'll be like a top sort of baseline. Here are our baseline key metrics that we care about. This has a weekly report, which is like a write-up that you would do on a weekly basis.
Yep.
And then if it's anything further, it's probably more of an investigative project.
Exactly, yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Well, this has been fascinating, Sam, and there's so much more I'd love to get to. So I'm going to have you back on the program sometime to dig in more.
Yeah, please do.
But this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today. This was really, really insightful stuff.
Well, thank you for having me, Kevin. What you're doing here is brilliant. Really good.
Well, thanks. Hopefully, I'm hoping it's helpful for everybody else. That's what I'm trying to do. So just a reminder, we go live every Tuesday, Thursday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Having a lot more guests on the program like Sam to just share their knowledge and their background, their stories, their experience. So definitely subscribe at kevinmandeville.com/newsletter or give a subscribe here on YouTube to get notified when we go live on air. And hey, give Email Tease a look. Go to emailtease.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram at emailtease. All right, Email Geeks, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks.